5:12 in the morning. Seattle was swallowed by a cold, early winter rain. A single mother stepped out of a rundown apartment building in the South Harbor district with exactly $8.14 in her bank account, heading toward a final interview that could save her life. She had no idea a billionaire was watching her from behind the tinted windows of a Rolls-Royce Ghost worth nearly $500,000. And she certainly didn't know that this man would shadow her every step for nearly 7 miles through the pouring rain. Claire Bennett pulled her faded coat tight against her neck. The rain soaked through her hair almost instantly. Clutched against her chest was a waterproof navy folder, held so close it was as if whatever lay inside mattered more than her own shivering body. No umbrella, no car, no one to give her a ride. She paused on the steps for exactly 2 seconds, then turned to look up at a third-floor window. Behind the thin curtain, the soft blue light of an asthma humidifier was still glowing. Her son was sleeping behind that window. Inside the car, Nathaniel Rhodes sat in silence, following the stranger's gaze. He had spent 30 years building the 5-star Aurora Crest hospitality chain, and the last 10 losing his faith in humanity. He no longer believed in resumes. He didn't believe in promises. He didn't believe the smiles in interview rooms. Nathaniel only believed in one thing: the way a person moves forward when life has left them with absolutely nothing. He glanced down at the Patek Philippe on his wrist. From here to the downtown Aurora Crest, it was nearly 7 miles. A quiet certainty settled in his mind. She'll give up before daybreak. Claire took a deep breath. Then she stepped down onto the wet, flooded street. No hesitation, no looking back. The freezing rain whipped against her face from her very first step. From the front seat, the driver asked softly, "Sir, should we head back to the hotel?" Nathaniel kept his eyes on her slender figure as it began to fade into the gray Seattle rain. 5 seconds passed. Then he said very quietly, "Follow her. Don't let her know." Dawn broke over Seattle, casting a cold gray light like a winter sea stretched beneath a sunless sky. Claire Bennett walked through streets that were still half asleep. A lonely gas station glowed with a pale yellow light in the downpour. A closed donut shop, its flickering neon sign reflecting on steam-fogged glass. Down at the harbor, shipping containers sat in silence, looking like sleeping giants of steel. The distant blow of a foghorn echoed through the chill, making the entire city sound like it was breathing in slow motion. The rain kept falling steadily, not heavy, just persistent. It was so cold that every single step had become a silent negotiation between her freezing body and her sheer will. Rainwater dripped steadily from Claire's sleeve down to her fingertips, which had already turned purple from the biting cold. With every step, her faded sneakers made a heavy, waterlogged squelch. It was a soft, heavy sound, like a wet sponge being pressed hard against the cold concrete. Every few minutes, she glanced down to make sure her navy waterproof portfolio was still dry. Her resume had to stay pristine, her certificates had to remain untouched, and the letter from her son. That had to be kept safe, too. Everything else could get ruined, but not that. Behind the soundproof glass of his Rolls-Royce Ghost, Nathaniel Rhodes kept his eyes on her from nearly 2 blocks away. Inside the cabin, the climate control maintained a perfect 72 degrees. The rich aroma of Ethiopian coffee and fine leather lingered in the air. Outside, Claire trudged through the near-freezing rain. Nathaniel began to feel a strange sense of irritation with himself. 5:58 a.m., Claire's phone began to buzz. The caller ID lit up on the screen. Ethan, her son. Claire ducked beneath a faded billboard near the train station to block the wind, then pressed the phone to her ear. His voice was still thick with sleep. "Mom? Are you at the 5-star hotel yet?" Claire checked her watch. She still had over an hour's walk ahead of her. The icy rain was soaking right through her socks. A sharp headache had been throbbing ever since she left the apartment. But she forced a smile, even though there was no one to see it. "Almost there, sweetheart." The other end went quiet for a few seconds. Then Ethan asked softly, "Are you cold, Mom?" Claire turned her face away, watching the traffic blur past through the gray curtain of rain. For some reason, her throat tightened. "Just a little. Mommy is fine." She hung up before her voice could crack. After hanging up, Claire stepped under the awning of a closed pharmacy. She unscrewed the cap of the small bottle she kept in her coat pocket. Inside, there was only a mouthful of rainwater she had managed to catch from a bus shelter earlier. Claire popped the last headache pill out of a crumpled silver blister pack. She swallowed it down with the freezing cold rainwater. No expression, no complaints. She just stood there in silence, waiting for the throbbing in her head to pass. Nathaniel watched the entire scene from across the street. For the first time in years, he felt that something was deeply wrong with how he judged people. And for the first time since his car had begun trailing this stranger through the pouring Seattle rain, Nathaniel Rhodes thought, perhaps this test is becoming too cruel. The Aurora Crest Hotel rose in the heart of downtown Seattle like a different world entirely from the cold, rain-soaked streets Claire had just survived. Its dark glass facade reflected the city lights, blurred and bleeding through the rain. Two Bentleys and a silver Ferrari lined the driveway under the canopy, where white-gloved valets opened doors for the guests. Claire stood across the street for exactly 3 seconds, not out of fear, but because her body needed a moment to believe she was actually about to step inside. 7:01 in the morning. She crossed the street. Her waterlogged sneakers made a heavy, squelching sound against the wet stone pavement. Inside the lobby, a wave of warmth enveloped her almost instantly. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the 3-story ceiling. A white grand piano stood in the center of the lobby, casting a warm golden glow across the polished marble. The scent of expensive perfume and sandalwood mingled with jazz melody so soft, it felt more like an atmosphere than music. Guests wrapped in cashmere rolled their designer leather luggage past her, never once sparing a glance. Claire took a few more steps forward. Water dripped from her soaked hems, leaving a trail of wet footprints on the pristine marble floor behind her. A male candidate standing near the check-in desk glanced down at her wet shoes and snickered. The housekeeping entrance is in the back, you know. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the lobby. They weren't loud, not loud enough to be deemed outright rude, but more than enough to let someone know exactly where they stood in this room. Damian Cole stood nearby, wearing a custom-tailored navy suit. He saw everything. His eyes swept over Claire once before he looked away, as if she wasn't even worth his attention. That stung even worse than the laughter. Claire didn't react. She didn't offer an explanation. She didn't look at anyone. She simply tightened her grip on the waterproof portfolio in her hand and walked quickly toward the restroom at the end of the marble hallway. The door clicked shut behind her. The soft jazz from the lobby faded away, leaving only the sound of water dripping from her hair into the cold, white porcelain sink. Claire bent down, using a paper towel to dab the water from the hem of her pants. Her hands were still trembling slightly from the cold. One shoulder of her coat was so heavily drenched in rainwater that the fabric had turned dark. She looked up at her reflection in the mirror. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were bloodshot from a lack of sleep. Her skin was pale from the biting cold. Strands of hair were beginning to slip from the bun at the nape of her neck. For a few seconds, Claire just stood there, staring at the woman in the mirror, as if trying to remember the last time she felt like she belonged in a place this beautiful. Then she took a deep breath. She used both hands to adjust her collar. She smoothed down the edge of the resume inside her folder, and she walked back out as if those laughing voices from earlier had never even existed. Claire returned to the lobby after nearly 10 minutes in the restroom. She had done everything she could to look less like someone who had just walked nearly 7 miles through the freezing Seattle rain 7. Her hair was tied back more neatly. The hems of her pants were a little drier. Her coat was still cold and heavy on her shoulders, but at least it was no longer dripping onto the polished marble floor. Only her hands betrayed her. They were still trembling slightly. Not a dramatic, obvious shake, but a faint, deep shudder that comes when the body has been cold for far too long, burning its last reserve of energy just to keep standing. Claire walked over to the candidate check-in desk. A silver pen lay beside the sign-in sheet. She picked it up. Her fingertips were so numb that the pen almost slipped from her grasp the moment she touched it. Right then, a woman's voice spoke softly from the other side of the marble counter. "Are you okay?" Claire looked up. The woman behind the counter was named Elena Morris. She looked to be in her late 30s. Her brown hair was tied back in a low ponytail. Her cream-colored uniform was perfectly pressed, just like everyone else's at the Aurora Crest. But there was something different about her eyes. No judgment, no curiosity, only recognition. Claire immediately forced a polite smile. "I'm fine. Elena looked down at her trembling hands for a few seconds, then quietly reached beneath the counter. When she stood back up, she placed a steaming cup of hot black coffee with a white lid in front of Claire. Claire hesitated. "I didn't order." Elena gave a soft, reassuring shake of her head. "Don't worry about it." Her voice was so quiet it almost faded into the soft piano music echoing through the lobby. "You need this more than I do." Claire stared at the cup for a moment, as if her mind couldn't quite process what had just happened. Across the lobby, wealthy guests in soft cashmere coats rolled their luggage past, moving beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. The rich scent of fresh pastries and expensive perfume drifted through the air. And here she stood, her feet freezing inside her soaked shoes. Yet a complete stranger had just treated her like a human being. Elena reached under the counter once again. This time, she pulled out 2 small hand warmers and a pair of gray wool socks, their paper tags still attached. Claire immediately shook her head. "No, I can't take those." Elena offered a faint smile. "My father had a stroke last month. I bought an extra pair." She said it so casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But Claire noticed the corner of a hospital bill peeking out from the notebook under Elena's hand. The final balance on the paper started with a $40,000, probably more. Elena quickly pulled the notebook closer before anyone else could notice. Then she cast a quick glance toward the hallway leading to the manager's office. "If Damien catches me looking after an applicant like this, I'll get written up." She said it with a light laugh, but Claire could hear the deep exhaustion lingering beneath her words. The Aurora Crest frowned upon employees acting overly familiar with job applicants. Everything here had to be perfect, controlled, professional. Even kindness had its limits. Claire took the coffee cup with both hands. The heat rushed into her freezing palms, sending a sharp needle-like sting through her fingertips. But she didn't drink it right away. She just stood there, holding the cup for a long, quiet moment. So long that the condensation on the lid began to slowly fade. It was as if some part of her was trying to remember what it felt like to receive unconditional kindness. Elena pretended to turn away and check the check-in schedule so Claire wouldn't feel embarrassed. High above on the 13th floor of the Aurora Crest, Nathaniel Rhodes watched the entire scene play out on his private office lobby monitor. He saw Claire's trembling hands, Elena quietly passing her the coffee, and Claire holding that cup as if it were the first warm thing she had touched in months. Nathaniel sat in silence before the screen for a long time. Outside his office windows, Seattle was still drenched in a cold, gray rain. And for the first time in his years of running 5-star hotels, where everything was meticulously designed to make people feel special, Nathaniel realized something. Sometimes, the only thing keeping a person from falling apart is simply someone offering them a hot cup of coffee at the right moment. 8:17 a.m. The Seattle rain still hadn't let up. Long streaks of water ran down the massive glass facade of the Aurora Crest, blurring the city outside like a gray watercolor smeared by a careless hand. Claire sat in the applicant waiting area at the far end of the 3rd-floor east wing. She had already put on the wool socks Elena gave her. At least now her feet were no longer numb with cold. The nearly empty coffee cup sat neatly beside her navy blue waterproof folder, which still had a few stray raindrops clinging to its surface. Claire opened her resume for the 3rd time, even though she had already memorized every single line. It was her way of keeping her mind from thinking about. If today's interview failed, she had no idea how she would afford Ethan's medication next month. At the far end of the hallway, Damien Cole swept through the HR department, a sleek silver tablet in hand. His custom navy suit was tailored to perfection, hugging his broad shoulders. A pair of polished black Oxford shoes caught the warm, golden glow of the lights, reflecting off the pristine marble floor. Everything about Damien was so meticulously put together that he barely seemed human. He walked straight into the private HR office without bothering to knock. 3 minutes later, Claire Bennett's background check popped up on the screen in front of him. Damien scanned it with cold efficiency. Eviction history, debt collection, medical bills, resume gap, 16 months. He leaned back in his leather chair. A faint, cold smirk played at the corner of his lips. It wasn't born out of amusement. It was the quiet satisfaction of having his worst assumptions confirmed. Damien clicked over to her credit report. Her credit score was so abysmal, Most luxury hotels wouldn't even trust her to handle basic transactions for high-profile guests. He scrolled further down the page, unpaid pediatric respiratory treatments. Damien stared at those words for a moment, letting out a sharp, dismissive sigh, as if he had just spotted a speck of dust on his expensive suit. Just then, Melissa, one of the HR managers, walked in. Damien spun the tablet screen toward her. "Are you seriously thinking of putting her through to the final round?" Melissa hesitated, shifting on her feet. Nathaniel wanted to personally interview this candidate. Damien let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Of course he does. A good sob story always makes people soft for a minute or two." He stood up, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking down at the lobby. Down there, Claire sat all by herself, clutching her portfolio tightly against her chest. Damien spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Luxury hospitality isn't for people who bring survival mode energy into a five-star lobby." Melissa remained quiet. Damien kept going. "Our guests at Aurora Crest pay $30,000 a week for a presidential suite because they want to step into a perfect, untouched world. Nobody wants to look at raw desperation in a place that sells luxury." He turned back, casting a cold glance at Claire's file. A woman with an eviction on her record, unpaid medical bills, and a resume gap of over a year. People like that bring chaos with them wherever they go. And a five-star hotel can never afford chaos. Melissa knitted her brows slightly, but her performance at her previous job was outstanding. Damien shrugged. Competence isn't the only issue. Impression is what the guest actually remembers. 10 minutes later, Damien quietly rescheduled Claire's final interview to the very end of the morning, making her the last candidate on the list. Then he sent an internal email to the operations management team. The subject line, "Potential risk considerations. No direct accusations, no violations of HR policy." Just words crafted carefully enough to plant a seed in the reader's mind that Claire Bennett could become a liability in the future. A risk hire, an emotional decision, someone who didn't truly belong at the Aurora Crest. What Damien didn't know was that the office door at the end of the hallway wasn't fully closed. Nathaniel Rhodes was just walking past, and he had heard everything. He stood still in the hallway for a few seconds. No one noticed. Inside the office, Damien continued talking about image standards, luxury culture, high-end client psychology. The polished buzzwords echoed inside the room, which was filled with the rich scent of cedarwood and dark roast coffee. Nathaniel looked down at the lobby below, through the floor-to-ceiling glass window. Claire was still sitting there, alone, her back straight, holding her cold coffee with both hands. Unaware that just minutes ago her life had been categorized as unsuited for luxury. Nathaniel felt something colder than the Seattle rain creeping into his chest, not because of Claire, but because for the first time, he saw clearly the class contempt that existed inside the very five-star hotel empire he had built over 30 years. 10:42 a.m. The final interview was held in the executive conference room on the 14th floor of the Aurora Crest. The room was in near absolute silence. A floor-to-ceiling glass wall looked straight out onto Seattle's gray skyline. A solid walnut table reflected the soft, warm light from the ceiling. A vase of white orchids sat in the center of the table. The scent of freshly brewed espresso mingled with the aroma of cedarwood and freshly printed paper. Claire Bennett sat at the far end of the conference table, her blazer almost completely dry, though faint water stains still lingered on her cuffs. She had been in the hotel for nearly 4 hours. Her headache hadn't completely faded. Her fingertips were still cold, but she still sat perfectly straight. Her navy, waterproof portfolio sat neatly beside her chair, as if she still couldn't quite believe she was allowed to be in this room. 3 senior executives sat across from her. Melissa from HR, 2 regional operations directors, and Damien Cole in the center. Nathaniel Rhodes had yet to arrive. His absence made the air in the room feel even heavier. Damien flipped through Claire's file one last time in front of everyone. No one said a word for several seconds. The sound of rain tapping against the glass behind her was so clear it almost became a part of the silence itself. Then Damien set his pen down. He leaned back in his chair. His eyes settled on Claire's freshly wiped shoes, before asking in a voice that was dangerously calm, "If you couldn't even afford a taxi here this morning, how can you possibly manage the experience for guests who spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a week at Aurora Crest?" The room went dead silent. Melissa turned slightly to look at Damien, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. One of the operations directors gave a subtle frown. Claire, however, didn't react right away. She simply sat there for a few seconds, her hands resting quietly in her lap. Nathaniel had been right about one thing. People reveal who they truly are when they are caught off guard. Claire was exhausted. Her body still carried the lingering chill of the morning rain. A part of her wanted to apologize. Another part wanted to stand up and walk out of the room right then and there. But then, she thought of Ethan. She remembered the glowing blue light of his asthma nebulizer back in their small apartment. She remembered her waterlogged shoes as she crossed the foggy overpass. She remembered Elena quietly handing her that warm cup of coffee, as if kindness still existed somewhere in this world. Claire raised her head. Her voice was incredibly soft, no anger, no tremble. The poor don't fail because they are weak. She paused for a beat. Outside, the rain continued to fall. They fail because they have to exhaust all their energy just to survive, long before they're ever given the chance to prove what they can do. No one said a word. Even the gentle hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade into the background. Damien went quiet. Melissa stared at Claire for a long, silent moment. One of the operations directors slowly lowered his pen, as if he no longer had the heart to take any more notes. And at the back of the room, near the glass reflecting the cold gray Seattle sky, Nathaniel Rhodes was standing, and no one knew how long he had been there. No one had heard the door open. He just stood there, completely still. His hands were buried deep inside the pockets of his black overcoat. His eyes were fixed on Claire. But in truth, Nathaniel no longer saw the boardroom. He was looking at another hotel, 30 years ago, Las Vegas. His mother, in her gray housekeeping uniform, standing in the lobby of a luxury hotel after a grueling night shift. Nathaniel had been only 9 years old back then 8. He could still vividly recall the smell of harsh bleach on his mother's hands. He remembered her white shoes, the leather peeling at the toes. And he remembered exactly what the hotel manager had said: staff are not permitted in the VIP areas. Then security was called. His mother was ushered out through the back door, even though she was only waiting for her son to get out of school. Nathaniel had forgotten about that day for a very long time, or at least he thought he had. Until this very moment, watching Claire Bennett sit in this room, her hands still cold from the rain, speaking of the price of survival before ever being allowed to prove her worth. Something slowly shattered inside Nathaniel Rhodes' chest. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but for the first time in decades, he felt genuinely ashamed. Not because Claire was poor, but because ultra-luxury establishments like the Aurora Crest forced people like her to feel as though they needed permission just to exist within their walls. No one in the room had even noticed when Nathaniel Rhodes first stepped in. It was only when one of the operations managers instinctively bolted upright that the others turned around. The air in the room instantly shifted. Melissa was the first to stand. Then the two regional managers followed. Even Damien Cole immediately adjusted his posture, his body reacting as if programmed to fall in line the second the CEO appeared. Nathaniel stepped forward slowly. His black, tailored suit seemed to merge with the gray Seattle sky, pressing against the massive glass windows. He didn't look at Damien first. He didn't look at the evaluation sheets. He didn't look at the resume. His eyes were locked on Claire Bennett, the woman whose cuffs still bore the faint dampness of the rain, even after spending nearly 5 hours inside this 5-star hotel. Nathaniel pulled out the empty chair at the end of the boardroom table and sat down. Nobody said a word. Outside, the Seattle rain continued to fall. Finally, he spoke. "I watched you walk all the way here this morning." Claire froze. Melissa blinked, wondering if she had misheard him. Damien slowly turned his head to look at Nathaniel. He continued, his voice completely calm. "You walked nearly 7 miles in the freezing rain. No Uber, no taxi, no stopping." Nathaniel looked down at Claire's hands, still raw and red from the cold. He continued, "You kept that portfolio drier than your own skin." The air in the room began to shift in a way that was hard to define. No one looked at Claire as just an ordinary candidate anymore. But Nathaniel wasn't finished. He tapped the black tablet resting in front of him, swiping a data file onto the massive screen at the back of the room. The operational chart for Aurora Crest flickered to life. Housekeeping schedules, luxury inventory routes, night shift allocation, vendor timing overlap. Damien stiffened ever so slightly. Nathaniel locked eyes with him for a single second before turning back to the room. This morning, while waiting for her interview, Claire Bennett discovered an operational flaw that costs Aurora Crest millions of dollars every year. The entire room fell dead silent. Melissa stared at Claire. Claire stared at the screen. She had absolutely no idea Nathaniel knew about it. Nathaniel continued. Lobby cameras show you studying the scheduling board behind the concierge desk for nearly 20 minutes. After that, you asked Elena Morris for some scrap paper. He held up a small slip of paper. It was covered in handwritten numbers. Claire blushed slightly. I just happened to notice it by accident. Nathaniel nodded, but you saw what my executive operations team missed for 11 months. He tapped the screen. 3 housekeeping routes were scheduled to overlap at the exact same hour. Luxury inventory from the central kitchen is being routed all the way through South Bay storage instead of taking the shorter path. 2 overlapping night shift schedules are forcing Aurora Crest to pay double overtime for the exact same shifts. Nathaniel looked at Damien. Total loss, $3.8 million in 11 months. For the first time, Damien's expression truly faltered. Nathaniel continued, his voice measured and slow. Claire Bennett figured all of that out just by looking at a schedule while waiting for an interview. Claire swallowed hard. She knew every eye in the room was on her. But what made her even more uncomfortable was this. She didn't want anyone to think she was trying to put on a show. Claire took a quiet breath. Then she spoke softly. I had to survive on coupons for nearly a year. I got used to noticing exactly what's being wasted. No one interrupted her. Claire looked up at the screen once more. If a single mother has to count every gallon of gas and every asthma inhaler each month, she's going to notice when a system is burning through cash. Nathaniel watched Claire in silence for a few seconds. And in that moment, for the first time since building Aurora Crest Hospitality, he realized something that sent a chill down his spine. His company had spent years searching for excellence in rooms filled with the exact same kind of people, while those who actually understood the value of every dollar, every working minute, and every chance at survival were turned away at the lobby door simply because they were poor. 3 days after the interview, the executive floor of Aurora Crest Hospitality fell into an eerie, unusual silence. No one spoke above a whisper in the executive elevator anymore. Glass doors opened and closed constantly. In-house attorneys were spotted far more than usual. Emergency meetings packed the calendars. Outside, the Seattle rain kept falling. But inside Aurora Crest, the only thing spreading faster than the rain was fear. Nathaniel Rhodes personally ordered a full-scale audit of the corporation's entire operations and hiring systems. No advance notice, no time to prepare, just a single email sent out at 6:07 a.m. with a chillingly brief subject line. Full internal review authorization. By the end of the first week, what the audit team uncovered left the entire board of directors speechless. Damien Cole hadn't just been hiding operational errors. He had built an entire system of bias that spanned years. Dozens of applicant files had been flagged, not luxury compatible, not because of their qualifications, but because of a low credit score, a past eviction, an address in a low-income neighborhood, a resume gap, community college instead of an Ivy League degree, a lack of high-end presentation. An internal email from 8 months ago was recovered from the backup servers. In it, Damien wrote, "Luxury clients can sense survival energy the moment someone walks into a room." That single sentence began appearing in hospitality trade magazines just 2 days after the investigation leaked. The Luxury Business Journal broke the story first. Then came Forbes Hospitality, first the Seattle Business Review, then Bloomberg Luxury Markets. The name Aurora Crest Hospitality flashed across the media, not because of a new resort or a presidential suite costing $28,000 a week, but because of a class discrimination scandal deeply rooted in their internal hiring process. Security footage from the lobby that morning was pulled for the investigation. There was no audio, just silent images of Claire Bennett walking into the hotel, her clothes soaked from the rain, while a few other candidates smirked. The footage was less than 30 seconds long, but it was enough to leave millions of viewers deeply unsettled. Especially the moment Damien, standing nearby, saw her and simply turned away. Aurora Crest stock plummeted nearly 11% in just 2 trading days. The board of directors immediately demanded a public response. Damien was suspended that very week. After a second investigation, things got even worse. His performance reports were found to be doctored to cover up the $3.8 million in annual losses stemming from scheduling overlaps and inventory routing. Damien had maintained pristine operationship by pushing overtime into secondary funds, delaying critical maintenance, forcing day-shift employees into double rotations, and filtering out low-income candidates to maintain luxury image consistency. He wasn't just hiding losses. He had turned his personal prejudices into an unwritten corporate policy. 12 days after Claire's interview, Damien Cole was officially fired from Aurora Crest Hospitality. No bonus, no year-end stock options, no golden parachute. His name was scrubbed from the speaker lineup of the Luxury Hospitality Summit in Chicago just hours after the internal announcement. Two other major hotel groups immediately canceled the executive interviews they had previously scheduled with him. In the high-end hospitality industry, word travels fast, especially when a scandal involves discrimination. But what crushed Damien the most wasn't written in the headlines. It was his final meeting with Nathaniel Rhodes. The executive suite was almost entirely dark that day, cast in shadow by the heavy Seattle rain. Nathaniel stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass looking down at the city, while Damien desperately tried to explain that he was only protecting their brand standards. Luxury requires control, he argued. Clients just don't want to look at chaos. Nathaniel remained silent for a long time. Then he slowly turned around. For the first time in years, Damien saw a gaze from his CEO that was bone-chillingly cold. Nathaniel spoke slowly, his voice quiet. The person who saved this system was not my executive team, not our $6 million consultants, and certainly not our Ivy League managers. He paused for a second. But she's the very woman you didn't even want stepping foot in the lobby. Damien said nothing more. And for the first time since entering the world of luxury hospitality, he realized a truth that was almost too painful to bear. The woman he deemed unworthy of setting foot in his five-star hotel. Dot was the only one with the brilliance to see that the entire system was rotting from within. 1 year later, Seattle was as rainy as ever. Heavy, gray clouds continued to shroud the horizon every morning, as if the city had never learned how to keep the sky bright for more than a few hours. But Aurora Crest Hospitality had changed. In the main lobby, where staff had once sneered at a rain-soaked woman walking in with waterlogged sneakers, a small bronze plaque now hung near the concierge desk. The 7 Miles Initiative, a program created to recruit and support single mothers, those who had experienced homelessness, candidates with gaps in their resumes, working-class applicants, and those who were judged before they ever had a chance to step into an interview room. There were no grand slogans, no tear-jerking commercials, just a system that actually worked. Aurora Crest began partnering with women's shelters across Seattle, providing childcare support for single parents, funding transportation stipends for struggling applicants, and for the first time in the company's history, credit scores were banned from background checks during the initial screening. Nathaniel Rhodes signed off on every single policy without changing a single line of Claire's proposal. 11:06 in the morning, the executive floor of Aurora Crest was now accustomed to the sight of Claire Bennett walking down the glass corridor every day, holding an old silver laptop and a cup of black unsweetened coffee, Director of Guest Experience Operations. Her new business cards were printed on premium, textured white paper. Yet Claire still drove her 10-year-old SUV, the one with the scratch on the rear passenger door. She still brought her own lunch to work a few days a week. She still cross-checked schedules by hand before trusting the digital dashboard. And she still remembered, with vivid clarity, exactly how heavy her waterlogged shoes had felt that morning. In the Aurora Crest lobby, just to the left of the white grand piano, a glass frame hung on the cream-colored marble wall. Inside was an old, faded navy waterproof portfolio. There was no plaque of explanation, no name, no date. Most VIP guests walking past would only glance at it for a brief second before moving on. But the staff of Aurora Crest knew. That was the object that changed the entire hotel. 2:18 in the afternoon, the rain began to fall again. Claire drove away from downtown Seattle after a meeting with the South Bay operations team. The traffic light ahead turned red just as she spotted a young woman running along the sidewalk in the pouring rain, somewhere in her early 20s, just a thin jacket. Her arms clutched a folder tightly against her chest as if she were far more afraid of the papers getting wet than herself. That sight instantly dragged Claire back to exactly 1 year ago. The smell of cold rain, fingertips numb from the cold. The sinking feeling of walking past rows of luxury cars, wondering if you truly belong where you're heading. The SUV slowed down. Claire watched the girl through the rain-streaked window. Then she flipped on her turn signal and pulled over to the curb. The young girl startled slightly as the window began to roll down. Claire leaned across the seat and opened the passenger door. "Get in." Her voice was incredibly gentle. "It's freezing out there." The girl stood frozen for a few seconds, unable to believe what was happening. Rain kept drumming on the roof of the car. Seattle was just as gray and cold as it had been that morning 1 year ago. Only this time, no one had to walk the rest of the way alone. Nathaniel Rhodes had once watched a woman in the rain, measuring her worth 21. But Claire Bennett did not need to test anyone. She just remembered with painful clarity how incredibly lonely it felt to walk alone in the freezing cold, never knowing if anyone would open a door for you at the end of the road. Some people walk into a 5-star hotel with black credit cards and leather suitcases worth thousands of dollars. And then there are those who walk in with rain-soaked shoes, clutching a folder kept dry by the very last shred of their dignity. But the most terrifying thing has never been poverty. It is the exhausting feeling of having to constantly prove you are worthy of being treated like a human being just to get someone to listen to you. So many people out there do not fail because they are lazy. They fail because life drains almost all of their energy before their day even begins. A medical bill, a missed bus, a ruined pair of shoes in the dead of winter, walking for hours in the pouring rain just to get to an interview. And sometimes, the thing that keeps a person from giving up is not some grand miracle. It is just a cup of hot coffee, a kind word, or someone willing to stop their car in the pouring rain and open the door for them. Outro. If this story touched your heart, please remember that in the real world, there are always people fighting silent battles that we cannot see. And sometimes the smallest act of kindness is the very thing that changes someone's life forever. Leave a comment and let me know. If you were in the rain that day, would you have kept walking or would you have given up? Do not forget to subscribe to the channel to join me for more cinematic stories about dignity, compassion, and the people whom the world has never treated fairly. Dignity is not a privilege. It is a fundamental right.